Now, the idea of comparing a Tudor with a San Martin may sound a little bit strange. And it sounded a little bit strange to me until I had both of these watches in hand, and then it made complete sense to put these watches side by side. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches. And today I'm doing a side-by-side comparison, which is why I'm wearing two watches for this intro to the video. I don't normally do that. This may seem like a rather strange idea to compare a Tudor, a Swiss-made watch with lots of heritage, which costs almost 6,000 Australian dollars, with a Chinese brand from Aliexpress, which is more of a homage watch that costs just over 300 Australian dollars. But I think when you get these watches in hand, it becomes more obvious why you may be comparing these two. It's not just that there are similarities between them. It's not just that San Martin is definitely taking heavy inspiration from Tudor, because they definitely are. What I find rather interesting is that Tudor themselves have taken heavy inspiration to create the Black Bay. So it is interesting from that perspective that they are both watches that are borrowing some ideas. I get that the San Martin is borrowing a lot more and probably doesn't have the right to borrow as well as the Tudor does, but it's still an interesting idea. It is also interesting because they both have a fairly similar on-wrist experience because of their sizes. But they also are interesting to put side by side because of the qualities of them. Both are great watches. They are both very different watches, and it's probably not fair to say that the San Martin can sort of reach the heights of the Tudor, because it can't. There's no point in me trying to say that there's a possibility that the San Martin is as good or better than the Tudor. I'll say right now, it is not. The Tudor is better. It is the winner in a battle between the two watches. But that doesn't stop me wanting to compare the two. And I want to do that in a few different ways. So let's flip the camera and let's look at two awesome watches from two different price perspectives and see why I'm doing this side-by-side comparison. So this is probably one of the most unfair, yet one of the most interesting side-by-side comparisons that I have produced for this channel, because I'm looking at a $6,000 Tudor, or thereabouts Australian dollars, versus a $300 Australian San Martin off AliExpress. These watches have a lot that is somewhat similar about them, but also very different about them. And I want to put them side by side because, honestly, they are both such amazing watches, and of course similar sized watches, and of course similar themed watches, that I think it's really nice to actually see them side by side. And if you are more of an affordable watch collector and you don't get the opportunity to own a Tudor, this one may well be one that you end up picking up. So I think it's going to be interesting to you to then actually see it next to a Tudor. Now, the San Martin is not a homage of this particular Tudor, but as you can sort of tell, it is in that same sort of style, because I think this one here is probably a mix between homages of the Pelagos and the 58, because it has the 58's sizing, because both of them are actually 39mm cases. Very similar sort of feel as you look at it and as you put them on wrist. But the Tudor itself is a little bit thinner. It's 11.8mm versus 12.7mm. But the San Martin is actually a little bit shorter from the lug to lug. It is only 46.9mm, whereas the Tudor is actually 47.5mm. They're not that much difference, but that sort of thickness probably adds a little bit of heft to the San Martin, whereas you do feel it a little bit thinner on the Tudor. But because of those size similarities, I find them a very interesting similar watch to actually wear, because both being blue watches as well, both being dive watches, both having those dimensions, they are one of those sort of watches in my collection that could be slightly substituted for each other, perhaps not from quality, of course, but for wearing and on-wrist experience. But besides some general aesthetic similarities like the hands and those size dimensions, there is a lot of difference about these two watches. The San Martin in its price category is incredible. It truly is, and it's a great watch, but it can't stand up to the Tudor. And how could it? That would be unfair of it to do so. But there's some things that are going to stand out that really then make this watch better. But does it make it sort of 20 times the watch? And that is something that I do struggle with when it comes to more expensive watches. When you consider something that is as good as this San Martin, how can this be so much less money than a Tudor? Well, let me point out those differences. Fit and finish is something that is spoken about a lot when it comes to differences in prices of watches. And when we look at the Tudor, that is definitely obvious. The brushing is better, the polishing is amazing on this particular watch. The feel of the bracelet is incredible. But what I do find quite interesting, if you look at the end link of this bracelet into the case, there's a little bit of a lip there. And that may have been a deliberate choice by the people that have designed this watch, but there is a obvious, and you can feel the lip there. San Martin, however, this is the best fitting end link into a case that I've ever experienced. In fact, you can't even feel the transition between the case and that end link. That to me is actually better than the Tudor. Now, of course, they've got different types of bracelets, and the bracelets on both are good, but the Tudor really does stand out in regards to looks and feels, and the same is with the clasp. Both are good clasp. This has the on-the-fly adjustment, which is great, but the clasp on this Tudor is something rather special. The looks, how slim it is, how it opens, there is something rather special about the feel of this particular clasp. It's, you know, it is truly remarkable. It's, if I could get this clasp on every watch I own, I would do that. And of course, movements are going to be significantly different. The Tudor has an in-house movement, which is obviously going to make the watch more expensive, but also make it more expensive to service as well. But of course, it's going to be more accurate. The San Martin has the ever-reliable Seiko NH35 movement, which makes it cheaper to service or even replace. But of course, it's not going to perform the same. And can you actually sort of compare two watches when one is $6,000 and one is $300? Well, I think I've proven that I can. That's exactly what I've done today. Put a super affordable watch, something that is very, very good in of itself. It is a truly lovely watch. But putting it against another watch which is much more expensive, yet the Tudor, for me, it really does represent almost value at this money. I know that's scary to say, especially for me who is more of a value sort of affordable watch collector, but there are some watches that I've experienced that are in this price category that are nowhere near as nice as this Tudor. There is a reason why the Black Bay 58 gets so much praise from people, because it is an almost affordable sort of achievable price range for some people. Obviously not everybody, I get that, but it's within grasp for me anyway, whereas other luxury watches are just outside of my reach. But what is great is you can have some options like this that are more affordable, certainly more achievable. And it's not a replacement for the Tudor, but I can certainly understand that if I could not afford this Tudor, I would be so happy that this San Martin existed, so I can at least get a nice watch with a similar sort of feel on wrist. And whilst doing this comparison, while having these watches side by side, there is something that definitely came to mind each time. And wasn't that this was such an amazing watch, the Tudor? Because it is. I love it. It wasn't that this is such an affordable watch that is amazing for what the value of it represents. What does stand out to me is how good this watch is compared to this watch. It doesn't beat it, not in pretty much any category, but it's still how good this watch is compared to this one. And then you think about the value of these watches, and then it kind of blows my mind a little bit. And I really enjoy doing this side by side to try and give you a little bit more understanding on how good both of them are. Both different price categories, but both so good. But to see how good that San Martin actually is. And perhaps you might want to check out these videos next.